Hello, guys and gals. Welcome back to Clearly, the show where if it's complex, confusing, or controversial, it is covered here. I wrote that myself. Don't want to brag, but kind of just did. Okay. Kelly, what do you want to say to pull me out of this braggadocious pit?
That what people don't know right now is that you have vetoed every single one of my ideas leading up to this moment. We've
done lots of intros to get to this intro.
I have done, and I brought a lot of the ideas to the table, and I thought they were pretty good. You have rejected every single one. And you know what? You do the rest of this intro, because I had some sweet ideas about how to welcome people into this episode. That's a heavy episode about grief and emotions. And you know what?
Guys,
you do it, because
pray for us.
I'm done.
It'd be awesome if you just walked off right now. Welcome to Clearly. Me and my wife are in a fight right now, but by the time you watch this, it's going to be totally resolved. We're talking about Job. Duh. And if you thought that Job, our man Job, was just this perfect little angel, emotionally neutral, just worship robot, where the worst things happen and he just falls prostrate on the ground and worships Yahweh, think again. There is that happening, but there is also a vibrant emotional life in our man. So stick around. We're going to be talking about that today. I'm still a little stressed that Kelly is sitting back away from the mic, looking at me with those angry eyes, but somehow we're going to get through it. Pray for me right now. Say a quick prayer.
That's okay. I forgive you.
Your prayers work. Enjoy the episode. Kelly, this is your baby tonight. I want you to take us on a journey. What are we doing? What are we talking about?
We're talking about Job.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, I have no clever responses to you. But if you've been tracking with us, you know that we have been working through the book of Job and have mainly spent time in the first two chapters 1 and 2, and seeing what we call Job's terrible, no good, very bad day. Just horrible things have happened in his life. And there's a whole heavenly scene playing out that we see that, I think this is key here. In one of the previous episodes was God even gives a comment that says, you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. So this hard came upon into Job's life with no cause found in him. And what we've seen is Job has fallen down and worshiped. We've seen him respond without cursing God. He kind of feels like this untouchable human of a person who can lose everything they've ever had, their children, their wealth, all their possessions, their health. His wife is mad at him. I mean, it's like everything is lost, and yet
it's worship. It just feels so. Well, honestly, if Job stopped at chapter 2, it would feel really one-dimensional.
It would.
That was
like, well, that's unrelatable.
Some good theology, but not incredibly helpful to my day-to-day.
Yeah.
Turns out, though, there's more chapters.
Yeah, so what we've seen is really Job's actions and behaviors in some ways in these early moments. And we're about to get into the middle part of the book where we're going to see more of Job's emotional life and his emotions and feelings and experiences in the aftermath of this horrible tragedy. And that's what we're talking about in this episode. We're not even going to get into what his friends have to say to him and all of that. We're just going to look at what's going on in Job and really talk about grief and what Job's modeling for us here in grief. So I think it'd be good to just start with, I think if you don't mind, sweetie, read for us. You told me you'd be my reader if I'll
be your reader. Because readers are leaders. I don't know if you guys know that, but
chapter 2, 11 through
the end.
3:1.
Now, when Job's 3 friends heard all this adversity that had come upon him, they came each one from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come to sympathize with him and comfort him. When they lifted up their eyes at a distance, they did not recognize him. They raised their voices and wept. And each of them tore his robe and they threw dust over their heads toward the sky. Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great. Chapter 3, verse 1. Afterward, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth.
So, news has traveled of Job's calamity. His friends have heard of it. They have come together and decided we're going to go visit with him.
Which, by the way, that gives us something, just a hint of the timeline. This was not like a Thursday, the first thing happened, a Friday, the second thing happened, and then there is prolonged suffering here. And I think that's kind of indicated by the fact that word eventually traveled. This wasn't like he, DM'd his friends.
We do know that all the first terrible loss happened in one day. That did happen in one day, but then there's a prolonged period. But this whole thing is
months.
Yes. So this is not like they came the next day.
Right.
Because if you remember, everything, he lost everything. And then it was, again, there's a day when the sons of God came to present themselves, and then he loses his health. So we don't even know exactly the time frame between those two things, between the loss of his stuff and his health. And then after that, we don't know how long it is before his friends have heard and decide to come to him. So,
but here we are. His friends show up, and this is not the Friends episode. A Friends episode.
We're going to talk about the Friends and what they have to say.
We are, but this is not this day.
No, it is not this day. Okay. Point being, though, it is very apparent to everybody. His suffering is very great, and there is almost a reverence for it, and that they're not saying anything. No one is speaking until Job speaks. So Job is the first to open his mouth. And the middle part of this book is just conversation. It's really interesting. It's dialogue. And Job opens it up, and it opens his mouth. And here's what I find so interesting. So a few opening comments real quick. He opens his mouth and he curses something. Now, that should ring a bell, because in chapters 1 and 2, we saw that as a repeated word, that Satan throws that out at God.
Yep.
If I get rid of... Job only loves you because you give him stuff. If you took all his stuff, he'd curse you to your face. Satan says it twice. He'll curse you to your face. Mm-hmm. And then Job's wife says, curse God and die. So there's this repeated kind of thing going on.
There's an anticipation that Job is going to curse.
Right.
And the prediction is he's going to curse God.
He's going to curse God. What's he going to do? So it's interesting in chapter 3 that it opens with he's about to curse something.
He does curse.
And he does.
Yeah.
But he doesn't curse God. He doesn't curse his wife or his children that he has lost. He doesn't curse himself. He curses a day. It says he cursed the day of his birth. So I just think, one, that's interesting to note there. And we'll talk more about what's going on there. But I think even that is still it is an offense to Satan, who said he's going to curse you to his face. And when Job does open his mouth, he doesn't. He will not curse God. Mm-hmm. So it's a victory on behalf of the Lord, I think, even in that moment. So I wonder if we should just go on through there. I had a few other things I was going to say, but sister. So Job curses the day of his birth. So let's talk about that a little bit. One thing that we know, one other comment I want to just make here in the opening moments, is in the very end of this book, Job chapter 42, we see this in verse 7. God is responding after everything has been said, and essentially says to the friends, you haven't spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. So as we start to read Job's words, as we start to see him process his grief, we need to have a category for, by and large, what Job is saying is good. We know that later on Job will repent. We'll see that in later chapters. So we know that not everything he did is commendable, and we can get into that. But when God looks at the situation at the end, in the final analysis, he looks at Job and says, Job has spoken rightly. Yeah. And so I hope that will be an encouragement as we go through this and process grief, because some of the things Job says are going to feel real uncomfortable to his friends. And God clearly has a place for it.
Yeah. Might be uncomfortable to you, too.
Right. It might be uncomfortable to us. But it's not uncomfortable to God. It's not uncomfortable to the Lord. I think that God has a space in his economy, in our relationship with him, for this type of emotional processing of grief and trauma. And so I just want us to have that in our mind as we get going into what Job is going to be processing.
Yep.
So we see him start voicing a desire here. And this is in chapter 3. So Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And here's some of what he says. Do you want to read it?
No, you read it.
Me read it? Great. I'll be the reader.
No, I want to read it.
Because
no,
readers are
kidding.
leaders.
You go ahead.
Haha, no. Job said, so he curses the day of his birth, and this is how he curses the day of his birth. He says this, let the day perish on which I was born, the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. So you're seeing the day, the night, that day. He's cursing the day. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice. He's looking at the day he was born and saying, I wish it didn't exist. I would like to curse that day. He will later go on to say in verse 11, why did I not die at birth? If I was going to have to be born, at least I could have died when I came out of the womb. Why did the knees receive me? Or why did the breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet and would have slept and I would have been at rest. What's happening here? As Job is processing and living in this prolonged pain, I think this cursing of the day he was born is really a cry for relief. That he is just at a place where he will say at the end of chapter 3, I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. The very thing that I fear has come upon me. His fears and his dread are now his reality, and there is no relief from his emotional turmoil. And so in an effort to just say, please give me relief, he says, why did I even have to begin this life in the first place? Mm-hmm. He curses the day, which, again, to go back to Job's integrity, this is really is that really possible to go back and erase the day you were born as you speak the words out of your mouth?
In the movie Looper, it is. Yes. And also there's several other films I can think
true.
of. But not in reality. But yeah, it is. It's just what grief sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's impossible, but it's a longing.
It's an unrealistic thing. He's not actually able to go back. I think in some ways it's a poetic expression of his longing for relief. And I think that's the first desire we see in suffering people, especially when it's prolonged and pronounced, is give me relief. There's just an ache for it and a cry for it that comes out sometimes in words like this. And again, God has a tolerance for that. For us to cry out to him with longing for just, would you give me a break? I can't take it anymore. That's what we hear him saying. Why didn't I die at birth?
And I think it's interesting. That cry for relief, there's something absent in this section that I want us to appreciate. There is not I think there's a little bit of a myth in Christian culture in the midst of our suffering that, especially in sort of like high sovereignty world, that there should be this, when calamity comes, almost like a tacit acceptance of that thing. Mm-hmm. And that is an unbiblical way to approach your suffering and your pain. That's actually a very pagan way to approach suffering and pain. It's what the Stoics would do. It's an approach that says, no, when hard things come my way, I squash those deep down.
Or it's just fate.
Yeah.
I can't change it. Get over it.
I can't change it. Right. It's happening to me. So, the longing for relief, we're going to abandon that, and we're just going to sort of take it like a man. Right. And you don't see that in Job, who, by the way, is a man, which we'll actually maybe get to in the Q&A next round. But I just think it's worth noting what's missing here in Job's desires is there is not this tacit acceptance, which can feel so even noble sometimes. Right. And maybe some of us have even bought the lie as Christians that
Right. We think that that's maybe the right play out from acknowledging that God ultimately is in control, which Job does believe. If you go to chapter 6, he'll say this in chapter 6, verse 4, for the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. Do you see him acknowledging God as being the occasion for this grief in some way? Mm-hmm. That he has an acknowledgement and he says it earlier, right? Is it chapter 2? Shall we not receive good and evil from the Lord? Mm-hmm. He sees it as coming from the hand of God, but yet he does not
settle into it.
Settle in and go, I'll just take it.
Yeah.
For him, I think this is the tension that I felt in my own grief. For me to fight for vibrancy in my actual relationship with God, if I'm going to preserve that relationship, then I can't just tacitly go, okay, that's fine, because that's not how I feel. How I feel is why I can't take this anymore. But there's that weird tension, right? Of God has allowed this, God is behind this, but I don't want it. And I trust him, but also please give me relief. It is a tension that we have to be willing to embrace at the same time. And we see Job doing it. God has done this. Also, why do you even let me be born?
Yeah.
If you were going to do this, why let me be born? I just need relief from this. So there's a desire welling up in him for relief.
Yes.
That is not a tacit acceptance, that is a healthy and a normative response for Christians in suffering. That should be something that you feel. And you should, if you feel that and haven't felt permission in something you're grieving to feel that, this is your permission. This is the Bible's way to say, yes, this is a welcome response in relationship with God.
Longing for relief is right. So when what we're doing right now is we're observing the desires of a sufferer. Yeah. And the first thing we see is there is a normal, even healthy, appropriate desire for relief. Mm-hmm. What's
Which,
the next
by the way, just to fill that out, he later in chapter 3 will go as far to say, can I not just die right now? Mm-hmm. That there is not just, I wish I wasn't born. It's like, can you just kill me right now? So again, that relief will go all the way to the line to say, I would like to just perish right now. Mm-hmm. He says, I'm so bitter in my soul, I long for death, but it does not come.
Yes.
And again, what do we see that's not there? We see him long for death, but yet take no effort to actually do anything about that. We do not see him take means towards suicide or anything like that, though there is a longing for death. And so I think it's important to notice that there is both an acceptability to, I just want relief, just could I perish?
But I don't take it into my own hands.
It's not mine. Yeah.
We'll probably spend some time in the Q&A dealing with that, because I know we've gotten a couple questions even about suicide in light of this. So we're going to explore that in the next episode. But yes, that is not something that you see Job doing here. And I think that is important to note that that's also missing here. Hey everybody, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Better Man. What is one of the most trusted voices in the life of a man today? It is Better Man. Better Man is more than a resource, it's a movement. Look, when men are better, the world is better, right? Better Man gives men the language and the license they need to be all that God's called them to be. Because when men are at their best, marriages, they thrive, and children are blessed, and the church is strengthened, and the world changes. And I don't know about you, but I want our world to change. So let's change the world together. Check them out today at betterman.com. That's betterman.com. Okay, so relief, what else do we see?
Well, what we're going to see him desire here in chapter 6, he'll speak up again in chapter 6 in his initial kind of emotions coming out. And I love this. I resonate with this so much. Chapter 6, verse 1 and 2 and 3 says this, Then Job answered and said, Oh, that my vexation were weighed and all my calamity laid in the balances, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. What he's saying is, can someone please weigh my suffering? Can we count it out and measure it? There's validation. I want validation that what I'm going through is legit hard. Mm. Can you measure it out with me? And I think one of the best examples of this is actually from one of my favorite Pixar movies, Inside Out. So we'll just go real heavy to real light real quick. If you have not seen that movie, it's a fabulous movie. And in it, there's a character named Bing Bong.
Well, we really did take a turn.
We did take
ladies
a
and gentlemen. Hold on to your... All right, here we go.
But it's seriously such a great analogy that even in the articles I've written about grief in the past, I've referenced this moment.
You've referenced Bing Bong in your suffering articles?
I have.
Just want to be clear if that's what you're saying. Okay.
Because in that movie, there's this tension of joy and sadness. That's what you're seeing in those two characters. And joy wants to move on. Come on, get over the loss. Just move on. That's where joy will come. Happiness will come that way. But instead, sadness comes over to Bing Bong, who has lost something precious, and sits down next to him and says, wow, you've lost something important to you, and it's gone forever. Man, that's terrible. And it's actually in that moment that you see comfort. Comfort is given in that moment because his suffering has been weighed and measured. Someone has been willing to sit and go, let's just measure it out. This is how much you've lost. That's one of the first things that I seek to do when I'm listening to somebody in suffering and grief is I'm listening and I'm trying to hear what they've lost and even reverbalize it to them. It sounds like in the loss of that job, you've lost relationships. You've lost a task you enjoy. You've lost income. There's now stability that's gone and there's fear in its place. And just will reverbalize that. And that is quite a comfort to somebody in suffering. And Job is longing for that. He wants validation. Will you validate what I've lost? I think that, again, is a very normal desire in suffering. So
yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm thinking about our own marriage, and I'm thinking 9 times out of 10, that's actually all you're wanting from me in the hard thing. This is like the classic,
Right.
like guy swoops in, tries to solve all the problems, and any guy who's listening who's married, you know this thing. You're like, well, just do this, duh. And she's
Right.
like, I just want you to feel the thing with me of how bad this is, how hard this is, and I'm not, how do you say this in English? Good at that. But I can appreciate it from this text that this is again, an appropriate, normal way that grieving should take place in a human being. That feeling for validation should rise up. We hunger for relief. And we hunger for validation, that you would see my suffering and appreciate the weight of it with me. So those two things. What else do we see here?
Well, I think one of the last desires we see bubbling up in him is a desire for grace. And here's what I mean by that. We're not reading what his friends are saying right now, but we'll get to that.
It ain't awesome.
It's not helpful. And anyone, again, who's been in any kind of loss know that it's very normal to experience people as saying unhelpful things. And he's looking at them saying, could you just give me a little grace? Here's where that shows up. We see it in chapter 6, verse 26, where it says, do you think that you can reprove words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? It's like, I'm in despair. Just, can you not take my words so seriously? It's just wind. Can you just let it blow away a little bit instead of measuring out everything I'm saying in this moment of loss and trying to combat it with truth? I've lost everything.
Yeah.
And my words, can they just be wind?
So there's like, in him, there's like a
Yes.
longing for a tolerance for all of the swirling despair he's experiencing. And I mean, anybody who's suffered, this, like you're just saying stuff. You're just feeling all the things. And if everybody took you literally in that moment, that'd be a rough go. You know what I mean?
Well, how many people in marriage have faced their first really, really hard moment in marriage? And is it not tempting to be like, why did I even marry this person? If somebody in that moment would be like, do you mean that? Is that what you mean? Are you really doubting that? Da, da, da. Well, here's what your covenant means. Can I pull out your vows for you and show? It's like, that's not what they need right now.
Yeah. These are windy words
They're
happening.
windy words. Yeah. Just give them grace. Let them they're in the middle of a whirlwind of emotion, and words just come out in that moment that just need a little covering of grace. I think of the Proverbs. It says it's a of man to overlook an offense. There are many things that we are meant to just overlook in someone else. And I think Job is longing for that. He's been through so much. Everybody is saying, curse God and die, curse God and die. And he's not. And he's just grieving. And it's like, can you not pick my words apart in this moment and just give me grace? So I think those are like these three desires you see bubbling up. And give me relief. Can you validate what I've lost? Can you just cover me with a little grace right now?
That's so good. And I think what's going to be interesting in our next episodes is going to be when we start looking at the friends that really these are the three big buckets that they're going to transgress with him. If this is what comes out of a grieving person, a desire for relief, a desire for validation, a desire for grace, you're going to see those three longings just be totally mutilated by his friends. So we're going to spend some time looking at that and then thinking through together some strategic ways that we as good friends to each other in suffering can care well for each other. And I'll give you a hint, it's going to look a lot like this list. But I do think that is just interesting for us to consider, that this is what every grieving person, it shows up in the heart of every grieving person.
It does.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and you're in your own season of grief, I hope it feels encouraging.
Yeah, like you're seen. You should feel seen in this because...
Yeah, if that's where your heart is, if you're just aching for relief and you're aching for those things, that's normal. Job felt that. And again, God has a place for that. Yeah. But there's a few, I think there's a few other things to just say briefly that I think are good for us to have a category for things that are acceptable and normative in our suffering as people who want to be faithful to God. If we want to walk rightly with God in suffering, it doesn't necessarily mean just put on the happy face and I trust you, God, and I'm moving on quickly and easily. Sometimes I think we think that's success in loss and in suffering, but it's not. So here are just 4 other things we see Job experience in his suffering that I think, again, there's a place for in the scriptures. The first one is despair.
Yeah.
We see Job have a total absence of hope. It's totally gone. You see it in chapter 7, the first part of chapter 7, where he'll say, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. Remember, my life is a breath. My eyes will never again see good. Do you see that he feels like I will never, ever again see any good? He is, and we know later in this book he will see good, but in this moment, his experience is utter despair. I have no hope. I'm not even sleeping. Sleep is not relief for me. I have bad dreams. Nothing's making it better. I feel total and utter despair in this moment.
And I think this is probably a good moment to say, the windy word thing is probably taking place here, right? Because we know this is the same Job who's going to say, like you said, I know my Redeemer lives.
That's right.
In my flesh I shall see God. And we know ultimately, and we'll probably talk about this in the next episode too, that no hope is not the place where the grieving Christian ought to live, to sort of set up camp. But it is a reality.
It is something we do experience.
Yeah.
And if we live there continually all the time, that's a problem. I think that's a takeaway from the book of Job, because as we keep reading, Job will not stay there. But he does spend time there. It is a pit stop that he is at right now.
Yeah.
And again, I think God has a category for that. And I think we should have a category for that for friends and for ourselves if we find ourselves in a moment of despair. There's wisdom to exercise here, but it's someone may be in a moment of despair. Let them and be with them in it. Don't leave them alone in it. There is a moment to move on from it, but it doesn't mean as soon as you see despair, you eradicate it right away. I just think it's part of our emotional processing of deep loss. But we also see him, so we see him experience despair, and then we see him experience pain. And we know he's in physical pain, but he's verbalizing a type of pain that is emotional, that there is a type of stinging pain. You see it in Job chapter 3, 24. My sighing comes instead of bread. My groanings are poured out like water. He has fear and dread. You see it in chapter 6.
Verse 4, for the arrows of the Almighty are within me. Their poison my spirit drinks. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. Yeah.
He'll say in 10, I even exult in pain unsparing. So again, I think there's a temptation to numb emotions in grief, and Job is actually giving full vent to that pain. He's actually allowing himself to stay alive to it. And that, I think, is a harder work. And he's verbalizing it in the presence of God and others. And that's been important for me in my own spiritual journey to stay healthy in the midst of loss. There's a temptation to numb the pain, but he's experiencing it and bringing it to light and verbalizing it. So we see him experience despair, pain. And you see him experience confusion. This is the third thing I think you see him experience. It really comes from this tension we've talked about. He says in chapter 6, verse 10, I have not denied the words of the Holy One. God, I'm on your side. Not denied you, yet your arrows are in me. Terrors from you come to me. And there's a tension in that he can't make sense of. And you see it in his opening words that we read earlier. He begins to ask a repeated question of why. I mean, is this not the classic response of someone in loss? Why? Why did I not die? Why did this happen? Why was not received as this? Why is light given? Why this? He's bringing questions. He has confusion. You're seeing him in a place of, I can't make sense of this.
Yeah.
That's normal. Right theology does not, will not free you from the experience of confusion and loss. Yeah. It won't. Yeah. Right theology actually intensifies the confusion, I think. Because if you understand rightly, you go, okay, wait a minute. I mean, this reminds me of a season of suffering we went through. We experienced multiple miscarriages in a row, 3 in a row. And it was after lots of hard already. So especially for me, I had had much layered hard. And here in the aftermath of a third miscarriage, I remember being at our church's prayer room with my Bible open and reading Psalm 84. It says, no good thing will you withhold from those who walk uprightly. And I was like, I believe that. But you also said in Psalm 127 that children are a good thing. And you are keeping them from me because I believe the Bible that it tells me life and death is in your hands. And so how can I make sense of the fact that I've trusted you and I'm right before you because of the blood of Christ? You say you won't withhold good things from me. You said children are a good thing and you're withholding it from me. I can't make sense of all that. My right understanding of the scriptures actually intensified my confusion as an expression of grief.
Yeah.
And here's what's hard is that as Christians, we want to just solve that. We want to just erase
with
confusion.
Some theology.
I want to just put Band-Aids of other scriptures on it to make sense of it. Or look at you and say, don't worry, the next pregnancy will work out. And I'm looking at those people going, you don't know that?
Yeah, you don't know that, yeah.
God does not promise me that either. He does not give me that as something to hold on to. So don't say that to me.
Well, and it's interesting because if good theology was meant to be the salve for Job, you would think that God would extend that to him at the end of the book with like, well, here is the why behind it. And what God, gives him is really it's not a non-answer, but it's
not the answer
it's not the answer you want. And it's basically the answer that like, you'll just never get it, Job. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what God's saying. My ways are higher than your ways. Yeah. That's what God's saying when he says, did you make Orion? Did you make the Pleiades?
Yeah.
His argument is a little bit like what Paul says in Romans 9. Can the pot say to the potter, why'd you make me like this? Which is an answer in a sort. But I guess what I'm saying is, if theology is the thing that's meant to soothe us and take away all of our angst, you would think that would be what God provides Job at the end of it. But I think you're right to just acknowledge we do need to think rightly about our God in the middle of suffering. And I do think it provides a type of aid and soothing to us. I mean,
absolutely.
It is a theological statement Job makes later in the book when he says, I know my Redeemer lives. You have to know there's a Redeemer. You have to know that he lives. You have to know that you will see him in your flesh. You have to know some things. And that is a salve. But questions are going to come up no matter what, to your point.
Yes.
And I think we don't, especially Christians like us deeply committed to good sound theology, we don't need to be so grossed out when the why shows up in a person's suffering or in our suffering.
We don't necessarily need to try and answer it and solve it. And that's the hard tension. So confusion is such a normal part of suffering. It's normative. If that's something you're experiencing, that's not because you don't know your Bible well enough. And it's not because you don't understand well enough. It's just a part of loss. So, and then the last thing we see him experience is loneliness. In chapter 6 and 7, this is his second speaking up. It's after one of his friends has already had something to say to him. And in that moment, in the immediate moment of friends speaking to him, he's already feeling isolated and lonely. You see it in some of his words in chapter 6, verse 14. He says, "He who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers are treacherous as a torrent bed, as torrential streams that pass away." So it's just, they melt away, they disappear. He feels the unkindness of his friends, the distance growing from them as they're not validating him, just seeing his longing for relief, all those things. Loneliness is very normal to experience in suffering because no one is in your shoes.
Yeah.
And no one can fully understand it. And even to go back to our season of miscarriage, one of the things that was hard is I was experiencing a type of loss that you weren't. Mm-hmm. And I knew you couldn't fully understand it. And that aggravated me because it made me feel lonelier. And it's not that you weren't suffering loss as well, but it just was different.
Yeah.
And you couldn't understand what it was like to have emotional suffering and physical pain and things happening to me physically that are reminiscent of that. I mean, there were experiences I was having that isolated me even from my husband, and that loneliness just feels like it adds insult to injury. And it's just very normal. I don't know very many people who've walked through suffering, even with the closest friends in the world, who have not felt a sense of no one understands. And no one does understand. Yeah, you're your own unique person, and your suffering is hitting you in a way that only you will fully understand. That doesn't mean you don't need people in your life, but loneliness, the feeling of like an absence of that companionship is something that is normal. And if anything, he'll even say his friends are scared off by his grief in chapter 6, verses 20 and 21, which makes sense. If these kind of things can happen to a righteous man, that's a terrifying reality for others. And people tend to want to keep their distance from that because it makes you have to deal with, oh my gosh, what if that happened to me? Yeah. And so people actually tend to isolate themselves from intense suffering. And so all those things are very normal experiences. Job is a righteous man. God looks at Job at the end of the book and says, he's speaking rightly about me. And yet here we see Job in his emotional life experiencing despair, pain, confusion, verbalizing
things that we might
relief.
Even be tempted to rebuke another Christian for.
Right.
Yeah.
Give me relief. Please validate what's going on.
Yeah.
There's a place for that. That's all normative and healthy in our losses. That's
exactly right. And I think that's what this episode is for today, is just to, who of us listening has not suffered? Yep. And if you haven't, give it 5 minutes because it's coming. And I think it's important for us to just get eyes on the consummate sufferer of the Scriptures. Outside of the Lord Jesus, it doesn't get harder than Job. And I think there are some permissions granted here that are just good for folks in suffering to see. I think there's it's just good when you can go, oh, I've been there too, or I am there. And that's not something that God rebukes per se. It's something that I can go, okay, I can still love Jesus, hold on to him, and still feel wise inside me, like WHYS.
Why questions.
Those why questions. I can hold on to Jesus and still feel moments of despair. I can be in church and in community and still go, you know what? I do feel some loneliness right now. And that is not going to be fully solved in this life maybe, or in this moment. It might only be fully solved on the other side of life. And so I'm hoping that you're hearing this and you're going, okay, I now can see there is space for me, a grieving me in the community of God. I think that's one of the things that Job is doing here. And I think we both just want to invite you, and I think this text is inviting us to push back against that. I'm going to call it like a pseudo-Christian temptation towards stoicism and toward tacit acceptance. and lean into to do the harder work. I think that's what we're wanting it to invite you into. Do the harder work in your suffering of feeling deeply and then taking that and learning to cry out to your God. I think that is the invitation that we see from Job's life and experience. And some of us probably just need to hear that. I need to do that hard work of feeling the thing deeply, not squashing it, and then letting that turn into a prayer.
Yeah.
Letting it become like what David is doing in the Psalms in Psalm 43, that he's taking and he's speaking back to his soul, then he's speaking to God, and he's bringing those why questions to life, but bringing them to the appropriate people to talk to them about it. And I think that's a beautiful and godly response in the end.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope that whether you're in suffering or you know somebody who is, that this episode has helped you have some categories to think through that's maybe validated and encouraged you that you're not crazy for experiencing some of the things you have and seasons of loss, and maybe even helped you know how to walk with people better in suffering. It's a really uncomfortable place to be when you are experiencing great loss or someone that you love is. And so I hope that us walking through Job's emotional life has been helpful, and will give you some tools in those moments in your own life and in others.
That's right. If you found this episode helpful, we triple dog dare you to share it with somebody.
Triple?
No, I'm going to quadruple dog dare you. No, in history.
Why not?
No one has ever quadrupled.
16th did.
Wow. Words are hard. Words are hard, Kelly.
How would you say that?
I don't know.
See, you don't know either.
I'll Google it later. Share, like, subscribe. All these things can be helpful for getting the podcast into more ears and eyes. So be sure to do that. We'd be grateful for it. And we will see you next time for our Q&A about this content. So stick around. Bye. Welcome back. Let me start over. The show where everything's made up in the... Here we go. Hey, guys and gals. Welcome. Oh, man. What are you about to say? We are in a bad place. Please pray for us. Hello, guys and gals. Welcome back to Clearly, the show where it's...
You're still looking at me like I'm insane.
I don't like it.
You don't like it?
No,
that was my idea to go off script. Are you serious?
Yeah.